Good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining, those that have joined already. This webinar is brought to you by Foil as part of our much anticipated launch. Foil is a data and AI consultancy with an anti-consulting ethos. And my name is Josie West. I will be your host and facilitator of the potentially polarizing discussion, are modern data platforms fit for purpose? We will be talking about, for those in the data space, the trusty data platform, its evolution and its role in the future within a world of enterprise AI. For those of you not so familiar with the data platform, don't fret. We will be talking through everything you need to know, the history, the data platform boom, why they're brilliant, why they're not so brilliant, and what we all need to be thinking about, expert or not, to prepare for, I'd say, a rather ambiguous future. A little bit of admin before we get started. We are live on two platforms, both Teams and LinkedIn Live, with a total of about 150 people signed up. So thank you for everyone joining. We invite you to submit questions throughout on either platform. And we've got people on both who will be able to submit them to us at the end. So please ask your questions all the way throughout. Now, let me introduce my panel of two expert guests. We have got Matt Quinn, who is UK Chief Data Officer for Azure Data and AI at Microsoft, having spent 5 years at Microsoft and 20 years, although it doesn't look like it, in the partner ecosystem. Simon Turner, I won't try and guess how long you've been in the industry for, but multiple time Chief Technical Officer, only because I've known you for so long, no other reason. Chief Technical Officer for many organizations in the past, like Altius, Avanade, an expert of all things technology, in particular data platforms. So,
and obviously very old looking.
What kind of expertise do we have in the room? So I'm going to ask you both on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being novice, 10 being absolute expert. Where would you mark yourself when it comes to data platforms, Matt?
Well, having been introduced as an expert, I guess I can't really say 1. But I guess, yeah, we're in that growth mindset. I would say on a 7 is probably the right place. Used to be that way 20 years ago on a technical level, perhaps more on a kind of theoretical, kind of practical execution level than the deep tech these days.
Nice. So there's three to go if you ever wanted to go. Okay, Simon, 1 to 10.
Oh, no, Matt's already stolen my 7. I wrote some notes and I had a 7 as well and I am significantly older than Matt, I think, and probably older than most people on the call, which is slightly depressing. But having been doing this for about 35, 40 odd years, I'm pretty certain that a 10 is unobtainable in the space that we live in because it moves at such a pace. Tech in general, doubly so the data and AI space at the moment. And I learn something new absolutely every day. So I think being able to be a solid 7 for me, okay. I'm kind of comfortable with that.
Okay, brilliant. All right.
And it's like in 2010, I used to be an Azure consultancy, and I kind of had confidence in me to say, I know Azure, but I don't know what came out in Azure today. Like the rate of change is just astronomical. So you could never be 10, right?
Yeah, brilliant. I mean,
and I think you know that as you go. I'm pretty certain if you'd asked my younger self that same question when I left university, I probably would have thought I was a 10. And I think age and experience teaches you that you're really not.
Absolutely. Classic learning journey. Okay, so let's start with a bit of a data platform 101. Matt, I'm going to start with you. In simplistic terms, if you can, please, what do we mean by a data platform?
I guess it means many things to many different folks, right? So I think the key really to my mind is it should be about a place where the business can go to seek the data they need to gain insights into the health of the business, a process, a technology, something, and turn that into the ability to make informed actions and decisions. The underlying technology of that, insert plethora of technologies to bring that to life, but the opportunity really for a place where data lives with tools that help you turn that into the insights to act.
Great. And that's something really interesting and a learning sort of journey I went on as a data platform, not like a dashboard. You can see it, you can touch it, you can understand it. A data platform is a collection of different technology, but it serves that purpose, right? Okay. So Simon, I know you experienced the boom when data platforms kind of hit the data scene. I mean, about 10 years ago,
Yeah, about
maybe. So
1930, 1940.
but suddenly, right, the next big thing in data management is data platform. So what was the driver of this hype, this attention to the technology, and what was the change in requirements from organizations?
Oh, so just on that last point first, I think Matt coined that brilliantly by saying that a data platform is somewhere where the business goes to gain insight. Because I think that nugget there is probably one of the core reasons for our headline for this event. And I'll come back to that in a second, but we've already established that I'm very old. And for those of you out there who are in the same sort of age bracket as me, you might remember things like btrieve and CISAM, which was a long time ago. We're talking 30, 40 years ago. But that was basically databases in a file. You had a data file and you had an index file. But the information that was stored in the data file was pretty free format. The only thing you really cared about was the position of the index. And it was up to the program that was reading that information to decide how to interpret that information. And what that meant was that you had a lot of flexibility about how you stored information in that. There's a number of organizations that have been responsible for what we viewed as relational databases. Back there was a company called Software Development Labs, which then became Relational Software Inc. and then became Oracle, which obviously we know who Oracle is, named after a CIA project in 1977. That's today's piece of useless information for you. Not sure I'm supposed to say that, but hey ho. What those SQL database engines gave us was the ability to create ubiquitous access to information from all different directions, not just the program that was written to interpret that information. But that level of generic access came with a price, because the engine had to manage your data. It had to manage the concept of a schema. It looked after your indexes. It put layers on top of that data that meant that it became a little bit more rigid. Now, that was great whilst data was evolving and we were focused on particular domains and we had very specific use cases and questions that we wanted from the data. But as those grow and as businesses realize that actually you could have more and more value from your data, those questions became unpredictable and the amount of data grew. And so all of a sudden, your traditional data warehouse in a SQL database became bounded. It put restrictions on how you could grow and expand. And that's really where the concepts of the data platform came from. It was effectively unlocking your data from the restrictions, sort of the restrictions of schemas, being able to put loads more data into the supersized cloud-based storage environments that we've got, and then put a layer over the top of it that allowed you to interrogate that and to, as Matt said, drive insights from it. But with that unshackling of the data, though, came a load of responsibilities, because then all of a sudden, as technologists, we became responsible for some of the things that we'd kind of forgotten about because we'd given it to the SQL engine to look after. So the indexing, the inserting, the management of how we all looked after the data, that came back to us to look after, which is okay, because we were happy with the trade-offs in that. We could store much more data, we could query over enormous volumes, but that trade-off was kind of important. And to Matt's point, as the business then starts coming with more and more questions, more and more ad hoc questions in very, very unpredictable ways, that really starts to stress data platforms as they sit today.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's interesting, isn't it? You talk about that there's almost that cycle of it started out with completely unstructured data that was bespoke, and we had to kind of build our own custom index to go query it. We added structure, clues in SQL, structured query language, to kind of like build that structure and rigor to make it more reusable. And we kind of come the other way to actually, we need that dynamism. And you talked about there, like adding, the data warehouse kind of evolution that came before the modern data platform. it was great at answering the questions we predicted. So we built the answer, we curated, we filtered and sliced that data, we kind of cleansed it to within an inch of its life to answer these very specific questions. And then the business immediately asks a slightly different question that's a cross-cutting concern, and it needs, you know, loads of re-engineering to make it work.
Exactly. Back then it was that novelty. Businesses had a database. They could ask these questions and it was great because they'd never had that before. But it wasn't long, exactly to your point, Matt, it wasn't long before people started asking different questions, unpredictable questions, unforeseen questions. And when the volume of data and the number of sources grew almost exponentially, it's just created a world of flux in that space. To your point, I love the way history repeats itself, and we come back around again into the same similar areas.
It's that agility piece, right? How do I answer the questions that the business needs? It's all very well having the data and the insight, but if 6 months after I needed to make a decision, that's no good, right? I need to put it in the hands of the person who's making a decision where and when they need to make that decision.
Yeah. Right.
And to be able to allow that cascade of questions.
And it's a case of getting data together and allowing different questions to come in so that the data and the work that data platform is doing can expand, can stretch, can sort of develop based on the questions that are being answered. So if we were to bring this to life a little bit, this would be an example. You know, you've got an organization, maybe a retail organization, they've got a chain of stores selling, I don't know, let's say some clothing and some accessories, and they've got a number of different problems. They've got maybe ineffective marketing. Let's take inventory problems as one. You've got lots of information, supply chain, sales, the customer preference, the inventory at the time, the inventory that's coming in, and being able to understand that better. Am I right in thinking then a data platform essentially can integrate all of that data, can answer those specific questions where it can kind of bring it all together?
So it's a leading question here. Do I walk into the trap? I guess those are all sources and their capabilities, right? So they're things that the data platform needs to have all of that data. It needs to make it available. It needs to have some degree of confidence that the data is real and trustworthy and kind of comes from a source that we trust. Mm-hmm. But actually the real answers are in kind of a more business domain piece. So actually the same data might feed into lots of different places, right? My procurement process will need a conversation with where are my warehouses and what's my distribution chain look like, along with who are my suppliers and what's the product catalog that I have. So like each of those raw ingredients needs to get baked into a cake, which is a business domain data product that says like, this is actually my finance model or my procurement model or my, insert other domain in the business.
So let me jump in then. Let me just jump in there. So we talked about data platforms and how they've developed, and that the boom was the right time and we reacted in the right way, and data platforms have been the answer to a lot of things for a long time. Matt, what's the catch? Are they fit for purpose? What should people be looking for? Let's say there's someone on this call who is thinking about investing in a data platform. Is it the answer to everything? And if not, what's the limitation?
I'm going to use, anyone who's heard me talk would know I kind of default to talking about Lego bricks, right? So data platforms and the technologies that exist are fantastic Lego bricks. And you can use them to build anything, right? And the interesting thing there is you could build something really functional that serves exactly what you need and does what you need, or you could build something that's a mess, right? It's about how you put the Lego bricks together to build something that is useful and functional and serves a purpose. And I think that's one of those pieces. You could give me a bunch of ingredients and I'll bake a really bad cake. You give that to Gordon Ramsay, he's going to bake an amazing cake with it. So I think there's a difference in how do you take those raw ingredients and turn them into a product. And that's the kind of nuance for it. There will be limitations, and I don't think there's a silver bullet that's buy this, tick this box, and it'll work.
But Matt, I think that exists at both that Lego. I love Lego, love the analogy, and I think that's right at both the technical level and also those Lego bricks as data products as well, because I think one of the things that we saw early on was people used to overthink the way they would analyze data, because data is exactly that. It's just ones and zeros. It has no concept of its context or its purpose. And you can, what was it they used to say, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And you can make data say anything you want, really. If you look at it hard enough, you tweak it enough, you include the right number of sources, and it will say pretty much anything. Understanding the context of your business, to your point, Matt, that cake, understanding how you bake that cake and get it right is super important, because that is both at a technical and at a data product level as well.
So let's make this really simple, right? Love analogy, love cake, love Lego. If there's someone listening to this,
Don't eat
what
Lego.
does that actually mean? What does it mean? What's the word of advice for people who are about to step into their data platform journey, or they're in there already and it's perhaps not, answering all the questions they hoped? What's the piece of advice to that to consider?
Governance, data quality, context. It's not. We used to, and Lord knows I was responsible for getting totally obsessed by schemas and structures and the technicalities of how bits were arranged on a disk. Loved it. But that doesn't really answer the business's questions. You need, to Matt's point, you need that level of confidence in not just in your data, but in your information, in that sort of phrase that's being bandied around now, that knowledge. You've got to understand how that goes from data to being information to being something that is well curated knowledge that is totally aligned to your business domain context.
Okay. So let's come back to knowledge in a moment. Let's move from data platforms, fit for purpose, but limitations, be aware. Fast forward 2024, we are unbelievably only 18 months in to what is arguably, and people are fatigued about this conversation, but elephant in the room, biggest disruption in the data world, certainly that I've ever seen. The introduction of, or the sort of rise of, large language model, even bigger than that, not just language, generative AI, so audio, images, video, exploding the capability and opportunity with AI, but of course with data in general. Before we kind of get into what that means for data platform, Matt, I'll start with you. What does it mean for data? So, I mean, we all know that ChatGPT or insert other capability that you use often could write us a brilliant poem about elephants. But what does this generative AI capability actually mean for how we consume and interact with data now?
I think that there are two elements to it, right? And the interesting angle is, what demands does AI put on our data? Standard kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? You feed the AI with garbage data, or you augment the AI model with garbage data, you're going to get garbage results. So what demands does it place on our data platforms, on our tools, on our processes? And at the other end of the spectrum, what does it enable us to do better with data? How can we, go from this model where I think there were probably a decade or so where storage was seen as cheap, right? Cheap storage is cheap, so store everything. We'll kind of, we'll capture everything for the sake of it. And we've now probably got lakes and lakes or oceans of data that we don't necessarily know how to make much sense of. How can generative AI, it doesn't just generate, it can also invert that and understand or kind of read semantic context and reason over data. So I think it can be used in both contexts. I think the real opportunity is that it has captured the imagination of a very different audience in our organizations. So where data was something that data people cared about and obsessed about and wanted everyone else to recognize the value of as an important enabler in the business, and occasionally business would have a kind of glimmer of engagement and recognize that this is something that can help them. I think what the generative AI boom has done is actually, we're seeing the board down have an interest in this technology, and there is a very real recognition. I think the phrase I kind of worked up the other day was, data will become the rate limiting step for your success with AI. If
Right.
you haven't got the data in the right shape, you'll only get so far with AI. And you can do a couple of projects with limited data and deliver transformation with AI that will on its own be useful. But if you want to do this at scale and get the compound effect of hundreds of use cases that each delivers efficiency and effectiveness or a new user experience, that's going to require a more ubiquitous set of data to be able to fuel that AI. And I think so it's going to create demand, but it's also raised awareness in the board that data is something we need to get right. And we need to invest in this space in order to unlock the potential of AI in our organization. So there's there's a few different pieces of the puzzle, and they're all kind of fighting for a bit of attention in the organizational mindset at the moment.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And it's an interesting point. We've got a webinar that I'll talk about later next Friday, where we're talking about the AI arms race and how people can get ahead. And everyone's talking about AI and these capabilities they want to use. No one wants to talk about sorting out your data. But in reality, you know, that's the most important bit. That's the bit you need to really invest in. So, okay, suddenly we've got this capability. Every consumer of data, no matter how experienced or technical they are, we've got much more consumers of data appearing in organizations, has an opportunity to consume, absorb, engage with data in a very sort of human, conversational way, makes it more accessible. We need to have good data foundations for that to be successful. Simon, we've got this brilliant tool, data platform. It's been the sort of best and only option for data management for many years. Considering this change in the industry with AI and the way people are now looking to consume data and access data, what does that mean for the data platform? How does that need to adapt or react?
I think it's potentially twofold and sort of working from the consumption end backwards. One of the to Matt's point, we can reason over data. We can look at data with AI and generative AI in particular in ways that we haven't done before. And anybody who is a super data geek looking at tables in third normal form, trying to work out what an outer left join looks like, it's really difficult, especially if you've got lots and lots of tables. If you can give that structure to generative AI will build that query for you. And it's that level of enablement using a natural language query to be able to generate an interface into your data in the form of structured query language in terms of SQL. That's a real enabler that allows anybody who can think of a requirement, think of a question, to turn that into something that they can point to that data to try and get the answer. Now, to Matt's point, you've got to get your structures right. You've got to create the right ingredients for that cake to actually taste good and not poison you. So you've got to check and make sure your ingredients are okay. But you can unlock that level of insight from your data in a way that we haven't been able to before. Now, that in itself creates further upstream challenges, because then all of a sudden we're going to be empowering the business to ask or even more questions. And I'm a big IMDb fan. I love IMDb because I love all of the links, and you can go from one film to an actor to another film and on you go. Questions and queries on business data are often the same. You can look at something and you go, I didn't know that. Why is that sales in that particular retail outlet down? And then you can look at another set of criteria and properties and attributes for that store, and then that will generate another query, and so it goes on. And so the business is constantly curious of their data. That puts demands on the upkeep, the maintenance, the planning for your data platform in ways that are only going to get worse. It means that potentially in old terms, you would need bigger and bigger teams to look after your data platform, and you've got to make sure that everything is kept in sync and you've got the right level of integrity and you're doing all of that. And that can become an exponential problem in terms of maintenance. But if you think about what we're actually building, if we're in an Azure environment, you're building Azure resource management templates, ARM templates, scripts that build you and manage these assets for you. But again, generative AI is in there in a way that it could potentially help us. If we can explain that environment to generative AI, it can build those assets for us in a way that, and in speed terms, in ways that we've not really had before. So it puts the onus in terms of understanding in a different space. You've got to understand your business and the context. And if you can describe your environment correctly to generative AI, it will build those assets for you. It can be that maintenance team for us in a way that we've never really had before. And that's really exciting because that will create platform velocity in a way that we've not really seen before. And that, I think, ultimately is the crux of where we sort of talk about things not being fit for purpose at the moment. We have to rethink how we manage these environments.
Now, the way you've just described it seems, for someone who's never thought about that before, could feel a bit overwhelming, exciting, the answer to everything. It sounds easy. What's the risk? What's the catch?
Well, it's definitely not easy, but there's two other evolving. Well, there's one really easy one, which is that there's always humans in the loop, and so being able to check these things and make sure that we're doing sensible things is really key. The other thing is the evolvement of some of the new product environments that we're seeing now, and aspects of what we would look at as data platform built from our Lego bricks are actually becoming commoditized and wrapped in product structures that are kind of taking some of that real hard work away. And that's really exciting as well. The data platform elements becoming a little bit commoditized, but that's a good thing because it means we can do the same thing faster and in a slightly more, in a safer way. Put generative AI in there, we have a velocity that we've not really had before.
I think to your point, Simon, and this layers on a concept that I think, I used an analogy yesterday. When I went to uni, I had to learn to program an assembly language, right? And it was hardcore, and it was important to understand how it works, but I've never written a piece of software in assembly language since. And I would argue that if assembly language was the only language anyone ever wrote software in, we would not have the digital world we live in now, because we just couldn't move as fast as the world needs to be able to write enough programs. So abstractions come in, kind of higher level languages that abstract from some of the lower level details, and then simpler and simpler languages up to low code. I think the same thing's coming for data. Like the opportunity here, you mentioned there, and you referenced Boyce Codd, right? Third normal form, and so a data engineer will need to know about these things, and referential integrity and ACID compliance for transactions. Like these are things that data engineers will always need to know, and there will be space for that engineer. But how do we unlock the ability for wider populations of people to be able to add value by combining data, by, in a low code fashion, pulling in data sources to enrich the platform, to be able to combine data from 2 or 3 different things without needing to know that technology? Some of that might be low code. Some of that might be AI doing that, correlated subquery that joins X and Y and does that in an efficient way. So I think it's not about replacing data engineers. It's unlocking the volume of work that needs to be done. I talked about data, a lack of data in the right shape being the rate limiting step for transformation. If we can get more people able to deliver value on that data, we'll unlock a huge transformational gain. The same as we've seen in software development and engineering, moving from kind of lower level languages to more higher levels of abstraction.
I think this is really interesting because it's probably a whole nother topic around jobs and the future of jobs for people that are coming into this space. And you've given an example of, it's no longer necessarily relevant to learn a particular language. It's to learn how those languages interact with one another, and learning that sort of higher level of abstraction now, because the technology is developing such that it's moving more towards low code. So there's more. What we've discussed is there's more questions, there's more data, there's more of a demand on that data team. So, there's sort of available jobs. There's always going to be things that need to be done in that space, even though the sort of the capability of those people might shift slightly. Simon, I'm going to go back to a point that you raised earlier around knowledge, and you talked about moving from, I think you said, data to information to knowledge. What does that actually mean? We all know what data, information, and knowledge means, but what do you mean by that in a business context, in a data platform context?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I was just thinking of Matt's analogy around code and how we've moved up from assembler through 3Gs, third generation languages through to some of the slightly higher level languages. We kind of missed out 4GLs. They were going to rule the world and put developers out of business when I first started work, and that never seemed to really happen. But it's that level of abstraction and management that you put from a higher level on top of a lower level concept, which is kind of what the languages we've been talking about do. Everything is still ones and zeros at that very base level. Can't get away from that. That's what runs everything. But sitting on top of that, we have this concept of data. We have rows in a database. We have items. Those items in their own right mean something, that they have structure, they have kind of a little bit of validity in their own right. But understanding how they fit within your organization, how they arrive with context within your organization, that's what constitutes knowledge. And it's when I sort of mentioned that you can look at data for long enough, you can make it say anything you like. How do we avoid that? How do we put the business knowledge, the guardrails in around the information that we have, so that people can intrinsically, to Matt's earlier point, create these well-formed data products that automatically understand how they're used within an organization? Then data becomes knowledge, and it's within that context of an organization and the structure of an organization. If you can look at your data through those lenses, then that data will become knowledge.
So looking at your organization and understanding an organization, whose role is that? How does that impact the data team? Because it feels like you're stepping out of your kind of CDO space, chief data officer space, and into the business, right?
You said you weren't going to ask punchy questions, Jesse. What's going on?
I've changed my mind.
I changed your mind. But yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, this is where, and we, oh God, it's just constantly making me sound old, but we saw that through the 90s, where sort of IT departments kind of ruled the roost and pretty much held the budgets for absolutely everything, and would tell the business what they could and couldn't use. And that's very much changed now, thank goodness. But again, it's still, how do we become more human, more business centric in the way that we manage our information, manage our knowledge to drive results? It's incumbent on every aspect of the business to understand the organization. It's not just about data in tables and databases. They don't mean anything on their own. It's how do we put them within the right context within the organization. Now, I get that doesn't answer your question about whose responsibility.
Very clever.
But because I think it's everybody's responsibility. I think that it's one of those things that everybody within an organization needs to understand where they fit, what the role of the organization is. It's not one function. You can oversee it, you can govern it, but everybody has a responsibility for understanding the structure of an organization and how it works.
And practically, what does that really mean, knowledge capturing? I mean, is this a case of documentation that generative AI can absorb and extract information from? Is it another way? How do you capture knowledge? That feels like, if I was new to listening to this, it would feel like quite a far-fetched concept, right?
It's hard. I wouldn't say it's far-fetched. It's look, and I'm going to be really controversial. I just think that in a lot of areas we've become complacent and lazy. Now, so quick segue. Last year, maybe the year before, I spoke at the Green Software Foundation, which is an organization that is trying to engender sustainability into the way that we write code. And one of the and we were talking about how you optimize code and reduce the number of compute cycles, all those sorts of good things. But somebody in the audience, they said, "Oh, how can we learn about this? How can we get hold of these ideas? This is great." Again, because I'm really old, we used to have to transport programs around on 8-inch floppy disks. That was 128K on a floppy disk. If your program didn't fit on that, you couldn't move it around because there weren't any networks. So you optimized the living daylights out of it for a different reason, because we were trying to save space, not energy. But those types of disciplines have become forgotten and we become a bit complacent. And the same things happened in how we manage information and data. When compute resources were really, really expensive and only a couple of people had access to a computer, you were really careful about the way you managed your information and your queries. But because it's become ubiquitous, we've become a little bit complacent. And I think what we're about to see is a resetting of, not the resetting of the complacency, but a level of understanding of what's important in a way that we haven't had before. And yes, it is going to be challenging to begin with, but I think understanding a lingua franca for how we describe organizations is what we're starting to see happening at the moment. And that will be really useful, because what that description gives us is a context that we can provide to AI to allow it to do useful and sensible things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's almost the crux of it, isn't it? So just a reminder to everyone watching, whether on Teams or LinkedIn, please submit your questions. We've got some questions coming through already, and we're going to get those published up so we can answer those in the next few minutes. Matt, what's your sort of word of advice for people going forward, looking forward? And what's your prediction? And I know we're in a very fast-paced space at the moment, but representing Microsoft, right, you must see a lot more than we see with all the stuff coming out almost every day from Microsoft. What's the prediction around the future that we're going to have to start thinking about in terms of managing data, whether that's technology, whether that's other?
I'm just going to write this down. Hang on, Matt. Let me just write your predictions down.
Simon's going to go clairvoyant on me. I think the interesting thing, right? And if I knew the answer to that, I'd probably make some strategic bets in the stock market and off we go. But I think the interesting piece here is, how do we identify what things will remain constant as much as what things will change? And I used this phrase the other day, and I'm sure someone in our engineering team would shoot me for it, but like, technology is almost the easy bit. It's the people and the processes that are hard. And I think that will remain constant, right? How do we engage people and get them to embrace change to ways of working, change to patterns and practices? And that's both on the engineering side, like how we build these things, how we manage them, how we operate them. But equally, if the users reject the new way of consuming information or data or making decisions, then it goes nowhere. So I think those things will remain constant, right? So change management, how do we embrace and engage people? And to the point you made a minute ago, like, whose responsibility is this? Actually, it's incumbent upon all of us to collaborate with IT and the data functions in our organization to be enablers for the business to achieve the outcomes that they want to do. That can only happen in collaboration. So I think removing friction and breaking down barriers is going to be an important part of the next wave of this. From a technology perspective, I think Kevin Smith mentioned it at Build a few weeks ago. He talked about, we're in a kind of Moore's law period. In the 90s, PCs got twice as fast every 6 months. So there's that permanent moment of like, do I buy a computer now, or could I buy a better one in 6 months' time? And that exponential hype curve is coming with AI, right? The models are getting twice as fast, using half as much power and compute to deliver the same output. It's an exponential growth phase. You could argue, well, or maybe I'll wait until the next version of the model comes out and it'll be better. But we're not seeing any signs of that plateauing, like PCs doubling in speed every 18, 24 months in the 90s and noughties. The reality is this technology is going to continue to evolve at that clip. The reality is training the organizational muscle for how do we take that and embrace it and connect it to real business outcomes, extract value from it, get good at taking an idea into pilot, into production, and then scaling it out into our organization and helping the organization embrace it. That's going to be the real challenge that organizations face. The technology is going to surprise and scare us, right? That there is going to be things where we have this moment where, what's the phrase? Anything significantly difficult to explain or understand is perceived as magic. And that's what AI has done in the last 24 months, I think, as people have looked at that and gone, that's just magic.
Yeah.
So the test will be when we stop talking about it, right? When we just take it for granted, then we've succeeded. Like, we don't talk about mobile transformation anymore. We don't talk about digital transformation particularly anymore, because they're just like, well, it's just table stakes. And I think that's where AI will get to. It will become the baked in norm for lots of things we do.
I think there are
So
some.
just to jump in there, Simon, I'll come to you in a moment. What you're really saying, Matt, what I'm hearing is organisations need to become adaptable. They need to be able to react rather than build the best capability. They need to build the ability to be adaptable.
Agility is the word for it, right? So Peter Hinton's book, The Day After Tomorrow, talks about organizational agility being the single biggest asset. Actually, the rate of change isn't going to slow down. So your ability to understand, embrace the technology and adopt it into your organization in useful ways, not kind of the magpie effect of it's a shiny piece of tech and I want to play with it. How do I get that kind of goodness into the organization, turn it into business value? That agility and the ability to do that. Equally, to rule things out, to look at a piece of technology and say, do you know what, that is a distraction for us. Our priorities are X and Y. Does this help us achieve that agenda? Yes, no. And I love the nerd in me loves the videos around GPT-4o, and it can play Minecraft and it can see the world. I'm inspired by what that can do. Is it going to help me make a better business decision right now? There'll be domains where it's really useful, I'm sure, like autonomous driving, and there'll be things that it's really powerful for. There'll be consumer experiences that are powerful, but not every use case needs that. So how do I filter out the things that are distractions and focus on the things that will help me drive my business?
So would you like another hard question?
So that sounds like a loaded. I can't say no, can I?
No, you can't. Whose role is that? Whose role, going back to that, organization needs to become adaptable, needs agility within it. Whose role is that? Does that sit in data? Because what I'm hearing is you're kind of organizational, right? It's C-suite. It's not just the data is no longer a kind of siloed part of the organization that people come to. It's spread across everything.
So does the organization need to be agile and evolve, right? Is there a role that we've never heard of? Like the word CDO is what, 5 to 10 years old? It's kind of emerging as a role and a definition. Will that morph? Is it CTO? Is it CDO? Or is there a new role that we haven't yet quite conceived? What's the boundary of that? I think to TBD, like not quite sure what that will look like, but it does need to span silos, right? It can't be an IT function. It can't be purely business. It needs to have a lens that spans what problems is the organization trying to solve and how will an array of technologies help us solve them.
Yeah. Okay. Simon, what about you for sort of, big bet plan for the future? What do you think people need to be really focusing on and thinking about?
I think Matt point in terms of understanding that level of change and progress and what's remaining constant, because I think and it was Arthur C. Clarke that said that anything that is suitably advanced is going to look like magic, and there's both good and bad in that. One of the challenges that is if people look at it as magic, they don't understand the limitations, the boundaries for what it is they're actually looking at, because it has no frame of reference in their heads. It's just wow, and that's a real challenge, because how do you allow them to imagine in a achievable way? There's place for imagining outside of those boundaries as well, but in that short term, into the magpie effect, how do they just not look at it as a shiny next thing and turn it into something other than a new shiny chatbot? And that's the thing that is really key. But the other thing that Matt said was working out what's constant. I think last 24 months or so, we've seen a bit of an inflection point where the speed of change, which has always been blistering and constant, has outstripping our speed of thought. Now we're at a point where things are changing so fast that we can't really capitalize on those changes, and so we probably almost need to stop trying to chase that. We've got this tiger by the tail. How do we use technology to beat technology at its own game? How do we abstract again ourselves away from being driven by decisions being driven by technology, and actually make our decisions driven by the business objectives and the goals, and use technology like generative AI to move at a speed that we can actually make those types of choices effective? Because again, Matt talked about POCs. If we're running a set of POCs and by the time we get to the end of them, the text changed, what do? Do we implement instant technical debt, or do we go around that loop again and never actually land anything? And this inflection point on the pace of change is something that for me is a potential concern, because it can stop progress. I know it sounds a bit backward, but you get to this point where people can't actually ever put things into production, and that's what counts. When you get these things into production, POCs don't count. They're educational, we learn from them, but they don't count until they're in production. And I think that's the thing that we're going to see the biggest change in the near future, because we're going to see people using technology to almost beat it at its own game. How do we, and what we'll see as an abstraction, we'll get less obsessed by the actual technology because it won't become important. If we've got the business described in a technology neutral way, then we can use AI to apply that description to the latest or the greatest technology in that space. It doesn't really matter, and we can redo that very, very quickly. That's I think it's going to be a very significant change to the way we manage things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to come to some questions. So thank you very much, Simon and Matt. Now I have to do this before we go to questions. I don't want to give too much away, but at Foil we are proudly pioneering what we think is going to be a revolutionary approach. Of course, we're having this conversation, not just to data management, but how organizations sort of frankly approach enterprise AI in the right way. So I'm saying it here first, the knowledge platform. You've heard it here first, you'll hear it again. And if you want to hear more about the knowledge platform and how it differs from the data platform and how it supports enterprise AI, just drop me a note on Teams, on LinkedIn, or of course get in touch with Foil directly. Now let's go to some audience questions, because we've got some coming through, and I'll let you both decide, Simon, Matt, who wants to take them. We'll do one each, I think, in the interest of time. So we've got one here from Keith, I think. We have thousands of assets and sensors. We have many databases to collect the data. And now we have one central data lake with central definitions for reporting and science. Now AI comes in and it looks like scattered around again. AI in Power BI, AI in Dynamics, ChatGPT, Copilot, and so on and so forth. What will be the impact on our data and data lakes? Who wants to take that?
I'm going to put my hand up for that one.
Microsoft answer, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there are two things here that are really interesting to talk about, right? And we have Copilot proliferation in our products, and the way that I typically frame this for customers I'm talking to is Copilots effectively are us surfacing productivity enhancing capabilities in products you're already using. So how do we, in a kind of consumable fashion, build AI capability into your existing product? So whether that's Microsoft 365 and it's Teams, and you're asking Copilot, who was talking about what, or my favorite prompt is, what's my boss been up to? And it can go off and query the Microsoft graph in the context of me, look at everything that I have access to and work out which meetings was I in and what were the transcriptions, and bang, here's the actions. Back from holiday, what's your boss been up to? Those kinds of things help me do things I could have done anyway, right? I could have trawled through my inbox. I could have trawled through the transcripts of all those meetings and all the chats that I'm in with my boss and work that out. The AI is enabling me to do that better, faster, quicker, right? It's a shortcut and a productivity hack to get me there quicker. The difference is we've built that as a kind of SaaS product into something you already buy from Microsoft and you already use. Dynamics and Power BI were called out there, for example. Mm-hmm. Where AI then has the opportunity to have differentiated value is the same. I use my Lego bricks analogy again, right? The same Lego bricks we built the Copilots with are available to customers to build their own productivity tools, take their own private data and craft what they want to do with that, and surface that into a new capability that was something the organization couldn't do before, something different. Bring a new product to market, deliver a new service to your customers. So I think there are horizontal capabilities that Copilots will do. Take something you could do yesterday, make it easier, better, faster, quicker to do. And then there are new capabilities you can build in your organization where that's grounded in your own data. You have control over that and you build it bespoke. And, we talk about AI coming in, like AI has been around since the 50s. It's just hit this inflection point with generative AI. The large language models are magic Lego bricks. but it's the ecosystem of all the tools around it, right? How do you bring large language model with machine learning, with data that you augment that model with securely and privately? That's where the power is going to come. And that's what's going to change the need in data lakes to have good data and the right tools to vectorize it and augment the pieces, to then use that same model to reason over data that's, you know, in the data lake and that might have become a bit of a data swamp. You know, how do we mine what's in there and do something interesting with it?
I can see you bursting. I'm sorry, Simon, but I'm gonna move to the next question.
Hang on, because I think that, so morning case, by the way, I think that we've seen this before, and this is another example of where we've seen these things before. And Satya Nadella said it about bots. He said bots are the new apps. This was a while ago, and in that context, what we then ended up doing was gluing bots together to create these super bots. And I think that one of the things that we will see with this proliferation of Copilot, if you take some of the frameworks, Microsoft has this framework called the semantic kernel, which is like this umbrella glue that will allow us to glue intelligently, and with AI helping us, it will allow us to glue these Copilots together to do umbrella jobs and make sure that it's not just these kind of point solutions, and bring all these things together. And I think that is really key, because in the first part of our talk today, we're talking about data platforms. We're talking about using AI to do what we do faster. The next stage is, how do we make sure, and you mentioned it just now, as this enterprise AI platform, how do we enable organizations to use AI in a way that is really transforming their business? And that won't be just through Copilots. It's in ways that we are still imagining at the moment. And for that, we need these umbrella concepts to bring all of these things together as well.
That's the big transition, isn't it? And almost an education on the difference between AI and enterprise AI. Okay, so next question, last one, I think, in the interest of time, from Clive. An observation, not a question. Good to see you here, Clive. But one of the biggest issues with end users is that trust in data is still key in assessing whether the knowledge that's been generated can be relied upon. Google suggesting that glue should be used to help cheese sticks to pizza. Google suggesting that glue should be used to help cheese stick to pizza does not help with the trust issues. It's all about the sort of hallucinations, right, with AI. Any comments, thoughts
pretty
on
badly
that?
baked cake analogy there going on.
Yeah. Put some cement in there. But I think it's a great point, though, because I think one of the challenges when you don't know what you're looking at, how do you know whether you should trust an answer that comes back or not? And I use the example, if anybody's heard me talk about change mindset, I'll talk about a particular airline event. And if you ask ChatGPT to summarize, it does a brilliant job right up until the point where it says injuries and fatalities. It says none. And unfortunately, in that instant, there was 10. And if you don't know that, you don't know that what you're looking at is incorrect. So it's really difficult. How do you create trust in data? And again, this is one of the things that's obsessed me for a while, is how do you understand what bias looks like as well? Because trust, bias, ethical data is so super important to getting trust within the user communities for AI. It's a great question. I think governance, stewardship over the information that you're building out, all of which are higher order business functions, not in-depth data IT functions, is super important for all of that.
Any other comments from you, Matt? Any thought on that sort of risk of trust and knowledge and being able to rely upon it?
I mean, I think I'd love to say there's a magic silver bullet to it, right? But there isn't. And I think it's a combination of thoughtful design. Like, how do we trust as we build and design the flows through which data moves in our organization, from source to cleanse to output? How do we make sure? And that comes to like governance and provenance of data. To your point about the Arthur C. Clarke comment about magic, right? The risk here is that people trust it, and that's why copilots tend to have under it, the statement, "This was generated by AI. Check the homework." And I think culturally we need to have that piece where people don't just magically rely on this kind of the AI said it must be true. So how do we culturally embrace that as a change management? It's there to help me get to it quickly, but making sure that we've got the citations back and the discipline to actually check those when we were about to rely on a fact. and build that trust. There is no magic bullet to it, but somehow we're going to have to work that out, right? As organizations, we're going to need to design that into our data platforms, our knowledge platforms. And we're going to need to bake that into our change management so people understand how to trust data and when to not trust it and to interrogate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great point. So in summary for our conversation, and if you can, in a couple of words as an answer, are modern data platforms fit for purpose? Simon.
Oh,
I'll remind you again, a couple of words answer.
Yes and no, my two couple of words. They're very much fit for purpose today, and answering the questions that we are posing of them today. But in terms, again, to Matt's point, working out what's changing, what's remaining constant, making sure that we are positioning ourselves for what actually is probably the immediate tomorrow. I think we need to rethink and adjust the way we build and manage data platforms so that they can A, keep up with that velocity that's coming, and B, turn into that sort of higher order knowledge platform, because that's where the value is going to come from.
Yeah, thank you. Matt, same question
I'm
to you.
going to keep it to 2 words, and I can see that one of my former business partners is in the audience, and he's going to laugh because I always bust out this phrase, and it's a great consultant's question. I know you're the anti-consultancy, but I'm going to go for it anyway. It depends.
Very good answer to close with. Thank you, Matt. So before I close, I just want to do a final ask to my panelists. I'm going to give you a statistic. Research suggests that at the moment, 90% of Gen AI projects fail. 90%. Simon, Matt, one word answer. Are you surprised by this or unsurprised? There's a clear shake of the head from Simon.
Not the slightest bit surprised by that.
Unsurprised. Okay,
No.
Matt?
I'm not surprised, and I actually think in a growth mindset world, that's probably a good thing because we're experimenting, we're testing, we're learning. The important part is, are we learning from those failures in order to make the next project better, to make the next project more viable? Like, failure is not a failure if we learn from it. And so I think that's one of those bits that there's there's optics on that need to be really carefully considered.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Statistics.
Okay. Well, luckily, I've got an answer to that statistic because on Friday, the 28th of June, next Friday, 11 a.m., check your diaries right now, Friday, 28th of June, 11 a.m., we are hosting our second webinar of our celebration of Foil's launch, which is challenging the value of AI. So I think Gartner's new research now suggests that we are falling quickly from the peak of the hype cycle with Gen AI. So with that new research that 90% of projects are failing, what organizations need to do to get it right and actually stay ahead with competition and be strategic. We've got 2 other very special guests. Unfortunately, neither of you 2 are joining me, but we've got arguably the biggest name in UK AI industry. I'm not going to give it away until people click the link to join us. And we've also got a Chief Technology Officer for Europe, Middle East and Africa of a very, very well-known organisation as well. So I've got a fantastic panel again, and my esteemed colleagues will publish a link on either Teams or LinkedIn Live to the webinar. So you can sign up today, Friday, 28th of June at 11 a.m. for the AI arms race, which will be the business side of the AI discussion. That's it from me. A massive thank you to my panelists, Matt, CTO, Chief Data Officer of Azure Data AI at Microsoft, and Simon Turner, expert and evangelist of all things data platform. Thank you for answering. Thank you for letting me interrupt your flow. We could have gone on for hours. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. And thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for the invite.
Looking forward to
Likewise.
seeing everyone else next Friday, 28th of June, 11 a.m. Thank you all. Have a great day.